President Cherry, maybe we'll kick off this meeting.
Right.
Welcome everybody to this meeting. This is our 5,622nd meeting. I'm pleased to welcome all of you guys here. We've got the bell in the background, and if the team would just want to ring it so we're officially open here.
You can see this, but I have with me the 100th anniversary bell.
There you go. Well, the meeting is now open. President Cherry and Rob, you guys want to take it?
Yes, I'll just make some brief opening remarks and then turn it over to President Bob. But thank you, President Timo. This is a fun meeting, and so I want to express my appreciation, especially to John Ewing, who has been persistent in connecting our two clubs and sharing the history of Paul and Jean Harris and their connections, of course, to Scotland and their many visits. And I've had at least two occasions to meet with John on visits, including last month, where we met near Ayr with Bill Grant and Alex Thompson, who I see are on the call as well. And previously, I think got together at Turnberry with John and other club members. My role is emeritus, meaning they've kicked me out of leadership. But I was just by way of background brought into the Paul Harris Home project in 2004, when I was centennial president of the Rotary Club of Chicago. And as some of you will remember, 2005 was our 100th anniversary. And in the fall of 2004, we'd gotten a call from the owner of the home that Paul Harris and Jean, his wife, lived in. And this gentleman was a Rotarian, and he said that he was putting his house up for sale, and would we, the Rotary Club of Chicago, be willing to make an offer. So a few weeks before the annual convention in Chicago in June of 2005, where there were some 45,000 Rotarians from all over the world present, we acquired the home that Paul and Jean Harris had lived in, and then began a process, whatever it's been now, 20 years later, to restore the home to what it looked like in 1947 when Paul Harris lived there. And at the end of our program, we're going to have a video that was narrated by one of our club members and past president, Marshall Schmidt, who I see is on the line as well. But in a few words, this home is about maybe a few 20 to 30 minute train ride south of the city in a beautiful tree-lined area that is known as Beverly. And the homes on a street called Longwood Drive, where this home is located, are rather stately homes that were typical at the turn of the century, around 1900. This home was actually built in 1905, and the Harrises lived there from 1912 to 1947. From our perspective, it's a very important historical setting. We've nicknamed it kind of the Founder's Place. The Harrises named it after an area in Edinburgh, Cumley Bank, where Jean Thompson grew up as a child, and so they were attracted to this leafy green tree limbed area because of its sort of pastoral setting. You may remember that Paul and Jean met as members of a hiking or touring club, and the story is that he snagged his jacket on a fence, and she repaired it for him, and the rest, as they say, was history. Paul used to take this commuter train from the city, and the train station was just a block or two from his home. where he practiced law in downtown Chicago, and of course, founded Rotary on February 23rd, 1905, with three other friends. What you may also not know is that the first president of the Rotary Club of Chicago, Sylvester Sheely, lived in a home right behind Harris. He was a client. And so the early meetings of the club took place in the house, usually in the cellar or basement, which was a low ceiling space where the early planning meetings took place for what soon became Rotary National and then Rotary International. The Harrises not only lived in the home, but hosted not just club meetings, but also visitors from around the world. And if it was a visitor of some significance, there were frequently captains of industry and other political leaders. They would plant a tree in that person's honor in their front garden, which they nicknamed an International Peace Garden, because Paul was, of course, very interested in peace. The garden and home have been restored, and further landscaping work is scheduled. The home is owned by a private foundation called the Paul and Jean Harris Home Foundation, and we've raised several $1 million over the many years to complete the renovation. It is now open to the public for viewing, and you can kind of see what it was like. And we tried to replicate the look as it was when Paul and Jean Harris lived there. We are still in the midst of fundraising, and you'll hear more about that from the current chair of the foundation, Cheryl McIntyre. But for now, it's, I think, sufficient to say that the foundation has achieved its dream, primarily due to the great support of the Rotary Club of Chicago, who loaned the foundation the money to purchase the home, and to support from Rotary International, who also provided financing to try and make the house look like it did when Paul and Jean lived there. If you're not familiar with the Jean Harris part of the story, when Paul died in 1947 in the second floor bedroom, there was a service that was held at the Methodist Church, which is about a block south of the home, which of course was overflowing with visitors from around the world, and donations poured in following his death, which really funded the Rotary Foundation as we know it today. Although it was started in 1917, most of the money was donated in honor of Paul on his passing. And Paul is buried about a mile or so away at the Mount Hope Cemetery. There's a beautiful memorial dedicated to Paul and Rotary International. His actual grave is there, but there's a long walkway with commemorative bricks and seating. And interestingly, Sylvester Sheely and his wife are buried in the same location in this private plot. Jean sold the home approximately a year after Paul's death and moved back to the city of Chicago briefly, and then returned to Scotland, where she lived with her brother, who was a Presbyterian minister. And when she passed decades later, she was laid to rest in a cemetery outside of Edinburgh. So we are very proud of the results of having had an opportunity to restore the home to its original grandeur. And it's not an overwhelming place. It's not a mansion. It's probably pretty nice from a 1905 perspective, but modest by contemporary terms. And it's part of a Rotary History and Heritage Tour, so that visiting Rotarians and others who are interested might have a makeup meeting at the Rotary Club of Chicago, which meets downtown on Tuesdays at noon, as you know, 12 noon, and then take a short ride south to visit the Paul Harris home and his memorial gravesite, and take a short ride north to the city of Evanston, where Rotary International headquarters are, and where you can see the original room 711 of the Unity building, which has been recreated in the Rotary headquarters as the place where the first meeting took place, as well as a replica of Paul's office as he was president of Rotary in his day. So it's part of a multiple site visit to Chicago, and it's a chance to explore the historic roots of Rotary as the humanitarian service club that it is now become. So with that brief introduction, Timo, I will, unless you have something else to add, hand the microphone over to President Bob to lead the introduction on air, and then Rotary One will come back with its part as we've got in the agenda.
Bob, give me 1 second. I'm going to hijack the agenda for 1 second here. One of our members, past President Michael Ferris, wanted to speak to you guys for a second. He's going to Scotland tomorrow, I believe. Michael?
Thanks, President Timo. Yeah, my name is Mike Ferris. I was actually president of the Rotary Club of Chicago when Rob came to me and asked if the club would loan the money for the Paul and Jean Harris Home Foundation, and was very happy to shepherd that through our board, and very pleased with the progress that we've seen in the home, and very happy that it's been restored to its condition. I just wanted to, I asked Timo for 2 seconds because I actually am from Scotland. My family actually traces its roots back to a Covenanter who was hanged in Ayrshire in the 17th century. I'm on the board of governors of the Illinois St. Andrews Society, which, if you don't know, is the oldest charity in the state of Illinois in the United States, and is the Scottish heritage organization for the state. And I happen to be making my very first trip to Scotland this week. I'll be there for a couple weeks. I'm looking forward to doing the North Coast 500 and seeing what I understand is one of the most beautiful places in the world. So welcome to our virtual meeting. Happy to have this opportunity to get together with all of you, and just wanted to say hi. Thanks, Timo.
Thank you, sir. President Bob, you're next.
Great. Well, we are absolutely delighted to have the opportunity to participate in this special meeting, celebrating Paul Harris' connections with Ayr and Burns and Scotland. Yep, the North Coast 500 is fantastic, particularly if you do it outside the holiday season. It can get a bit clogged up with camper vans otherwise, but it's a brilliant trip. Just a brief, before I hand over to John Ewing, just a brief snapshot of our Rotary Club. We celebrated our 90th anniversary last year. We have 44 members, which is probably a small club in your terms, but actually quite a big club in Scottish terms. We're pretty active. We meet generally in the evenings, but we also have some breakfast, lunch, and virtual meetings as well. We get up to quite a lot of community activities, fundraising, golf events, sponsored walks, and various activities. And this year, a team of curlers from the club were the runners-up in the Rotary World Curling Championships, which were held in Dumfries in Scotland back in April. And we're very pleased about that. So without further ado, I'll hand over to John Ewing, who is going to make the presentation. Thanks.
Right, thank you, Bob. Well, this is all about Paul Harris, and it's all about his love of Robert Burns. Can you see me? Paul Harris really all started in 1928. Paul and Jean this time Paul was 60 years of age, sailed from Montreal over to Greenock and went to stay with Jean's brother, John Thompson, in Anbank Church, which is just outside Ayr. They stayed there. The idea was Jean was to go stay for a few weeks, and Paul was going to travel around Europe and open up Rotary clubs in Europe, England, and Ireland, which he did. And we can only assume that on this occasion and on other occasions where Paul came over to Scotland and stayed with Jean's brother, he formed his love of Robert Burns. And we can only assume, because it was in Ayrshire, that the love came from the brother. He had a chance to tour around and visit the sites and things like that. So basically, this was the background to it. And I was doing some research for the club on Paul Harris, and I checked up and I found that the only time he was ever recorded was in 1933, where he made a speech from Boston on the radio in the United States. In the course of that speech, which lasted about 8 minutes, Paul referred to Robert Burns a number of times. And I thought, this is incredible. Here's this chap speaking to Rotary clubs in the United States and talking about Robert Burns. And he said, Robert Burns, his works were really the true meaning of Rotary. And I spoke to my son about it, my son Kirk, and he edited that speech and took all the content out except the references to Robert Burns. It came to 58 seconds. And he put that, he worked on augmented reality, which is pretty high tech. I didn't quite understand at the time, still not quite sure about it, but he worked on augmented reality, and he was able to condense this in such a way that you could hear Paul speak on an iPhone or an iPhone or an iPad. And we composed a picture with a bit of history of Paul, and we offered it to the Trump Hotel in Turnberry. Donald Trump had spent £100 million, about $120 million, refurbishing that hotel. It was pretty fantastic. And we asked them if they'd be interested in hanging it in the Centenary Gallery. And they said, yes, we're delighted to do that. We think it's great. It's a real piece of history. So as I say, that was the next stage, and we presented it to Turnberry. I'm going to digress a little bit off the subject, because I should say at this stage that another American lawyer like Paul, namely Abraham Lincoln, President Abraham Lincoln, who had been educated by a Scottish teacher, he used to read the words of Burns every night. So it wasn't just unique to Paul. We've got a lot of history here. Finally, I contacted Rob Newfer, and Rob was coming over to Turnberry to play golf, and we suggested that we get together. A few of us went down there, met him, and presented him with a copy of the picture that hangs in the Trump Turnberry Hotel. And that's the one I understand you've now got over there in Chicago. And it's, as I say, it's a great, exciting time for us to do this. I think we're going to show some slides here, Colin. Do we want to show the one of the word? Colin? Yeah.
Remember the word, peace on earth, goodwill toward all men. To put it briefly, Rotary is trying to make the words of Robert Burns come true. You'll remember that. The time will come for all that, where man to man shall brother be for all that. If you are here, I believe that you would agree with me in my conclusion that the words of the Bard of Ayr were not the expression of an idle dream, that they were indeed prophetic, and that the finest conception of human mind, the conception of universal goodwill and peace, will in God's good time be realized in very truth.
Thanks very much. Now, I think we're moving on to a little bit about the background to Paul Harris at this stage, Colin. Paul Harris was born in 1868, as we know, in Wisconsin, and he had a very challenging childhood. And he graduated with a degree in law, Bachelor of Law, in 1891. But what I found most incredible with Paul Harris, reading his life story, was what happened after his graduation. In 1893, he signed up as a deckhand on a cattle ship coming to Europe. He was anxious to explore the world. Now, in those days, 500, at the end of the 19th century, 500,000 cattle a year were being sent from the stockyards coming out of the Midwest to Europe, live cattle. And Paul Harris sailed across the Atlantic twice as a deckhand on a cattle ship. You can imagine, here was a guy with a degree in law, clever man, and the conditions were appalling. The screams of the cattle, the rough weather, everything about it. It shows what a remarkable man Paul Harris was. Here wasn't just an ordinary guy. Here was somebody that wanted to do something very special. And I think it set him up perhaps for his whole Rotary career. By 1895, a couple of years later, he sailed as a passenger on a regular ship, and he was over to buy granite and marble for the American market. And he got the chance to travel again around Europe. And in that particular occasion, he visited Scotland for the first time, and he was very, very fond of Scotland. But it was prior to his meeting with Jean. And as we heard earlier, in 1905, he started Rotary with a few friends, and he married in 1910 Jean Thompson, as Rob has told us. They had no children. Paul and Jean paid 2 visits to Ayr Rotary Club. We were founded in 1901, as Bob said, and Paul and Jean paid 2 visits there. And in 1934, we presented him with a copy of the works of Robert Burns, and he made his last visit in 1937. The Rotary Club of Ayr have 2 letters from Paul, the last written only 11 days before his death in 1947. And Jean Harris came back on her own to Scotland before her move to Edinburgh, and where she later died. So that's really the background of that. And okay, well, can we move on to the set of slides where we're going to pass over to Jimmy? That's the photograph. That's the slide I haven't seen yet. That's slightly younger looking me and Rob at Turnberry a few years ago. It's a beautiful golf course and it looks great. And it was really nice to have you there, Rob. And it was great to make that contact. Next slide, please. This is inside Turnberry Hotel, and this is one of the porters showing the visitors the Paul Harris slide. You can see Paul on the picture here, and it's very interesting because I don't think there's any other pictures in that centenary thing that people can actually listen to him. Seemingly in Turnberry, everybody gets given an iPad as a part of their visit, and they can hear Paul on the iPad. Next one. That's the 4 founder members earlier referred to by Rob. Next one. That's Paul. Next one. Yeah, this is interesting. This is Paul Harris, Jean Thompson, and Jean's brother John, all having a meeting with the Rotary Club of Ayr. They all look rather different from today. It was back in the 1930s, but it's the only picture we've actually got with Jean and Paul and members of the club at that time. Next one. Paul and Jean in their Comley Bank house, and I know you've got this in the film, but it's a lovely photograph and we thought it would justify showing it again. Next one, please. And this is interesting. This is Enbank Church. This is the church that John Thompson was the minister in. I was rather hoping that the current minister would be listening in tonight, but she contacted me earlier today to say she wasn't able to make it. It's recently been restored and it's been kind of modernized inside. Next one, please. This is inside the restored Enbank Church. They've done quite a good job on it and modernized it. Next one, please. This is Paul and Robert Burns. At this particular juncture, I'm going to hand you over to Jimmy Begg, who's going to talk about Robert Burns and obviously tell the story as he only can. Jimmy is our expert in Robert Burns. He's a retired doctor of the town and he's superb at burn suppers. Over to you, Jimmy.
I've unmuted myself, if that's okay. I'd like to start with a digression and just say to Mike Ferris that I share his Covenanting history of he had an ancestor who was hung by the dragoons and so on, and my 10th great grandfather was shot through the head in front of his wife and children by Graham of Claverhouse. That was John Brown of Priest Hill. So Mike and I share the same form of tragedy about 350 years ago. But we'll move on. John's already mentioned your great president, Abe Lincoln, who we always knew as Burns folk that he had 2 books beside his bed, and one was the Bible and the other was the works of Robert Burns. But what is less known, very much earlier, that Robert Burns was a great admirer of George Washington and the American Revolution. And in turn, Washington was a great admirer of Robert Burns, and he, in probably the 1780s or thereabouts, owned a copy of Burns's works. But much later in the 19th century, when hundreds of thousands of Scots emigrated for a new life in America, and the very meagre luggage of most of them would be their Bible and their Burns book. So the Burns tradition spread through a fair area of America, perhaps more in the south and the west, through Scottish immigrants with their love of Burns and his egalitarian ideas and his championships of the common people. And more so, at least 3 American presidents, Buchanan, Garfield, and Grant, they made the return trip and paid social calls to Burns's 2 elderly nieces, Mrs. Isabella and Agnes Burns Begg, at their small cottage in Ayr when the presidents were visiting Burns's cottage in nearby Alloway. Next slide. Here, this is a picture of Burns's cottage on a typical, or just after a typical wet Scottish day, as you can see from the ground. And this was what we call a typical longhouse, a Scottish longhouse, with the family living in the 2 rooms to the left with the windows, and their animals living on the right-hand side of the house, from there right to the end on the right-hand side. That was very handy in winter because the animals gave them a fair degree of central heating warmth and probably a lot of bad smells at the same time due to their close proximity. Next. This here shows the thatching or the rethatching of Burns Cottage fairly recently by the National Trust of Scotland, who now own it. You can see the guys putting the thatching up. And this north gable that you can see to the left, it has a history as well, because the cottage was built by Burns's father, William Burns, who was a gardener in a nearby estate in Doonholme Estate, later became a tenant farmer. But he built that house with his bare hands himself. And a few days after Robert Burns was born, the gable end in a heavy, severe storm and rain and wind blew down. And Burns himself later described the event in one of his famous poems or songs. It was then a blast of January wind blew Hansel in and Robin. Next. Just here at Christmas time, shining a homely welcome or a hamely welcome through its lamplit windows. And next. This one here, this will come in later on in my piece. This shows the ancient medieval Alloway church or kirk and the graveyard. And it was a ruthless ruin even in Burns's time. It had been superseded by the new Kirk of Ayr, which had been built about 100 years earlier. But it holds many interesting graves. Next, including this one of William Burns, farmer in Lochleigh, who died in 1784. Robert Burns, his father, and his mother, Agnes Brown. Now, again, I have a wee family connection with Agnes Brown, because our family tradition said that we are fairly distantly related as kinfolk of Burns's mother. Next. And here we have, and this is a spectacular photograph of the old brig of Doon, the old brig of Doon, being framed on a winter's day by the new brig, the road bridge, which is to the west of it. And I'm sorry to say that, folks in America, that the old brig of Doon dates from the 15th century and was built long, long before Christopher Columbus ever discovered America. And apart from Lerner and Lowe's borrowed use of its name, it has absolutely nothing to do with Gene Kelly and his musical movie. But it was made world famous later by Robert Burns himself in his classic poem called Tam O'Shanter. Next. Oh, sorry, yes, just before we move on, this is another picture. Well, we've moved on from one to the other, but they're both pictures of the same bridge and its arches. Here we have Tam and Suitor Johnny. Now, in the Scots tongue, a suitor is a cobbler or a shoemaker. And these statues were sculptured by an artisan, just an Ayrshire stonemason called James Thom, who later immigrated to New Jersey. And after that, his family settled there, and he actually spawned a family dynasty of American painters and sculptors. They're wonderful statues. They were just chiseled as it were. He made no sketches, no plans. He just got two big lumps of stone and he carved these out with his mason's chisels, and they're wonderful pieces of work. Now, the people might know about Tam O'Shanter or not. The epic tale of Tam O'Shanter and the witches. It's an old folk tale, and it's too long to recite in full. It was based on an old Ayrshire worthy from the farm of Shanter, which Rob will be interested to know it is only about half a mile or a mile from Turnberry Hotel, where I should say, we should call him Golfer Rob. He met up with Crony Johnny down at Turnberry Hotel, half a mile from this farm of Tam O'Shanter. And I'll start, I think, by just giving you a flavour of the poem. It's a wonderful poem, a very humorous poem, and I'll give it in a few verses. The story basically, and sadly, is that unlike sober John and Rob, at the Ayr market, Tam was always, and I, far too fond of his whisky and of good company. And we start with a description of Tam after the market. And at his elbow, Suitor Johnny, his ancient, trusty, drouthy crony. Tam loved him like a very brother. They had been fou for weeks together. The suitor told his queerest stories. The landlord's laugh was ready chorus. The storm without might roar and rustle. Tam did not mind the storm a whistle. He was drunk. He was ready for home. He'd a 15-mile ride from Ayr down to Shanter Farm. Before him Doon pours all his floods. The doubling storm roars through the woods. The lightnings flash from pole to pole. Near and more near the thunders roll. When glimmering through the groaning trees, Kirkalloway seemed in a blaze. To Ilkabore the beams were glancing, and loud resounded mirth and dancing. Much the worse for drink, Tam was keen and curious, but not his old mare. Maggie stood right sair astonished, till by the heel hand admonished, she ventured forward on the light, and wow, Tam saw a nunca sight. Next. Warlocks and witches in a dance, nae cotillion brand new from France, but hornpipes, jigs, strathspeys and reels put life and metal in their heels. In a window bunker in the east, there sat old Nick in shape of beast, a towsy tyke, black, grim and large. To give them music was his charge. He screwed his pipes and gat them skirl, till roof and rafters all did dirl. Then old Nick spies him at the window. Poor Tam by this time was so roused by the dancing of Nancy, who's a buxom young witch, in a very, very short shirt, was in Scots a cutty sack, that he lost his reasoning altogether, and roars out, "Well done, cutty shack!" And in an instant all was dark, and scarcely had he Maggie rallied, when out the hellish legion sallied. Tam then had to run for his life, or gallop for his life, for the safety of the old Brigadoon, for he knew that witches dare not cross running water. And he just made it. Next. For Nanny, far before the rest, hard upon poor Maggie pressed, and flew at Tam with furious ettle. But little was she Maggie's mettle. Yea, spring, brought off her master hail, but left behind her ain grey tail. The carlin clottered by the rump, and left poor Maggie scarce a stump. And so, next, the moral and message of this tale for all of us, including Rotarians, is simple. Now, who this tale of truth shall read, ilk man and brother son take heed, when ere to drink you are inclined, or cutty sarks run in your mind. Think you may buy the joys o'er dear. Remember, Tam O'Shanter's mare. And now we have a picture, a happier picture, 250 years later, a winter scene, again with Tam's ride. You can see him, almost visualize him running from the left right across that bridge. When he got to the keystone and the mare leaped, he was safe. And that's Tam's story. But next, just to the left of that picture, just a few hundred yards away, is actually the National Monument, Scotland's National Monument to Robert Burns, which was built in 1826. It's not quite as big as the Lincoln Memorial, but in Scotland, we actually have something here to boast about in stone that's a lot bigger than that. Next. This is Ailsa Craig from the Ayrshire coast. And now it's a huge lump of granite. It's the plug of an ancient volcano, and it lies off the Ayrshire coast in the Firth of Clyde. And in its day, poignantly, it was a famous and heartbreaking landmark for immigrants on board ships heading from Scotland to America, being about halfway between, and also been about halfway between Glasgow and Ireland. It was also known as Paddy's Milestone. Next. And the main reason for Ailsa Craig, that it's a quarry for every curling stone that's used in the Winter Olympics. They're all quarried in Ailsa Craig, carried across the Ayrshire coast and fashioned into curling stones. So Ayrshire has supplied the curling stones for all the Winter Olympics and also for most of the world. And Scotland, in its turn, has provided that wonderful winter game that we all enjoy, and it gave it to the world, and it also gave it to your neighbour, Canada. And while we're here, I suppose, to rebalance that, let's not forget that we also gave golf to Rob and also to America. Next. And at this stage, I don't think we should, it was mentioned before by John, and I don't think we should forget Robert Burns's link with Paul Harris's Rotary ethics, and some examples of Burns's poems that affected Paul's philosophy and his attitudes. The first one I've just written down, put to mind, is one of my favourites. It's not in titles nor in rank, it's not in wealth like London Bank to purchase peace and rest. It's no in muckle mare, it's no in books, it's no in lear to make us truly blessed. If happiness has not its seat and centre in our breast, we may be wise or rich or great, but never can be blessed. Nay treasures nor pleasures could make us happy long. The heart's eye the party that makes us right or wrong. Very philosophical view. Or should we forget Burns's great anthem to humanity with its relevance to Rotary? You heard part of that quote in the speech that Paul made. A wee bit more of it. And then let us pray that come it may, as come it will for all that sense and worth o'er all the earth shall bear the gree for all that. For all that and all that, it's coming yet for all that man to man the world o'er shall brothers be for all that, and in present Rotary and sisters as well. Finally, Burns' song for the whole world, for the parting of friends, auld lang syne. Should old acquaintance be forgot and never brought to mind, should old acquaintance be forgot and days of lang syne. For auld lang syne, my Joe, for auld lang syne, we'll tak a cup of kindness yet, for auld lang syne. From here, Rotary in Scotland, thank you all for listening. And now it's over to you, Chicago #1. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Beck. I don't know whether you've seen the commentary in the chat box. People love the presentation. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
Rob, I think you're up next.
Yes, well, thank you. This is wonderful, Colin and John. Thank you both, and the rest of the members of the Ayr Rotary Club for what a wonderful presentation and connecting the historic roots of Rotary through Robert Burns. It's wonderful. Well done. I gave a few comments at the beginning about setting the stage really, or table for what's to come next, but we are grateful for this historic collaboration. And as John mentioned, yes, the photograph that he, the plaque that he presented with the embedded voice of Paul Harris is hanging in Comley Bank in Chicago, in the living room on the wall. I have sent photos of that, and you may see that in a minute, but we are very proud of that gift. And for future visitors to be able to hear the voice of Paul Harris, which is not, given technology, been readily available, is an extraordinary gift. And for generations to come, we'll be able to hear the words and voice of our founder. The next moment on our agenda is really to introduce some of the current members of the Board of Trustees of the Paul and Jean Harris Home Foundation. And I want to also have a chance to hear from its current chair, Cheryl, a past president of Rotary One. But before we do that, I simply want to acknowledge that this effort to create and recreate the home of our founder was a collaborative effort that involved literally thousands of people worldwide. And it was a dream that many people had back on the anniversary of the 100th year of the centennial founding of Rotary in Chicago, but it's now a place for not only Rotarians worldwide to see how our founder lived and where the early meetings of Rotary took place, but for generations of Rotarians who are not even born yet to be able to see where it all began. And we are very grateful that we're able to share that with you. Cheryl, I don't know if you are able to unmute yourself, but I thought it would be helpful if you could introduce the members, or maybe it's Timo, members of the Rotary Club, of the Paul and Jean Harris Home Foundation, and only mention that one of those trustees happens to be a Scotsman and my cousin, Scott McAdam, who is a past district governor of the birthplace district in Chicago. So I turn it to you, Timo, or to Cheryl for those introductions. And then we will proceed with the presentation of the tour of Comley Bank narrated by our own Marshall Schmidt. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Cheryl.
Timo, do you have a list of everyone who is joining? No.
Not in front of me, I'm sorry, no.
Okay, That's okay. So thank you for that introduction, Rob and Timo. I'm very pleased to be here today. And I've got to tell you, I am a member of the group that is enjoying this presentation so much. I've learned so much in just such a short period of time. And as Rob said, I'm the new chair. I came on board when Rob invited me to allow him to do fundraising for international fundraising. And I'm so happy that he did that and that I've had this great opportunity these last few years to work diligently to create the actual form of the dream that, like Rob said, so many people around the world had this dream. And now when people visit the home, they see their dream in reality. And it's such a pleasure, and it's such an honor for me to be a part of this whole effort. I don't know if how many board members actually joined. They were all invited, but as with everyone, everyone's so busy. But so Rob introduced Scott McAdam. He is the landscape architect, and he's very busy working to bring the Peace Garden up to the beauty that it was in when Paul passed away in 1947. We also have Keith Larson, who is the architect, and he has made sure that we've stayed true to the era that the house was built, as well as following it throughout the successive decades that Paul and Jean lived there. We also have David Templin, who was one of the original board members, and he is acting secretary right now. And let's see, we have Chuck Corrigan, who is just the immediate past district governor for District 6450. And he joined after his term was over, and he is our legal counsel. So we have several people.
And Dennis.
Oh, Dennis. Scott, is that you?
Yes.
So I'm sorry, how could I forget Dennis? He's the star of the show. Yes, we have Dennis Gorman, who is our treasurer, and he's awesome. Sorry, I forgot that. I don't know, he was on the top of my mind. So yes, we have, and we also have some incoming new board members. We have Marga Huco, who is the wife of John Huco, the General Secretary of Rotary International. We have Lisa Russ, who is a past president for Rotary One, and she will be coming in to fill David Templin's slot as secretary. And we also have John Hoyt, who is an AKS member, and he will be joining us as well. He's actually based in Omaha and will be joining virtually through Zoom. So I guess does anyone have any other questions that maybe I could answer before we watch the video? That is a very recent video. It was put together in April for the Council on Legislation, and it was shown 3 times during the Council of Legislation, I believe. And it was actually narrated in all the different languages of the people participating. It was narrated by Marshall Schmidt, as Rob Kniffer said, and it was a collaborative effort between Hunter Byington, Marshall, and myself. And we should be seeing that soon. Thank you,
Thank you
Shelby.
for your interest in the Paul and Jean Harris home. Today we will take a virtual tour, taking you back to their home in the mid-1940s. From a chance meeting on a hike where Paul tore his jacket, Jean told him she would mend his jacket, and before she had done that, they were married. 2 years after getting married in 1910, they purchased the home at 10856 South Longwood Drive in Chicago, which had been built, ironically, in 1905. They lived in the home for 35 years until Paul passed away in the upstairs bedroom on the right in this picture in 1947. They loved the English Tudor style on a hill in an upscale neighborhood of Chicago, Beverly. After Paul's death, Jean moved back to Scotland for the rest of her years, and the home passed through the hands of 2 families. In 2005, a group of dedicated Rotarians purchased the home. Their mission became to restore the home of Rotary's founder and maintain it as a memorial and historical museum. So let's go back in time to the home as it was in the mid-1940s and as it is today. Join us. The first stop is the Harris living room, sometimes called the fireside room, whether alone or with a good book or down to the studs and framework. A key component of our work was to recreate the focus on the fireplace. It has all come together. Restoring the mantel and installing period furniture, we have recaptured the place Paul and Jean called home. A few steps from the living room was Paul's and Jean's favorite place, the garden room. Looking out over the front of the home and down the hill, they would oversee the peace garden, sometimes called the friendship garden, that filled the entire front yard. Can you believe there was almost no insulation in that room? As we reconstructed it with dual-pane glass and double insulation. This is Chicago, after all, notorious for its winters. The room once again became warm and inviting. You can imagine the couple enjoying each other's company as well as the view below. If you were to wander to the back of the home, you'd find their kitchen and breakfast nook. In the nook, they would start their day by enjoying their backyard with Paul's beloved bird feeder and a warm breakfast inside. Returning to the home today, they might wonder why we took away their treasured view of the backyard. More on that in a minute. From the breakfast nook, you walk into the dining room. Our mission was to recreate the dinners that Paul and Jean hosted for Rotarians from all over the world. Jean set a pretty mean table, complete with a lovely view of the front yard's friendship garden. So where did the food come from? Kitchens back in the day were not very big. While Paul and Jean had the latest conveniences, such as an icebox and gas oven, space was at a premium. With a little work, we were able to recreate Jean's efficient kitchen. With the ring of a bell, Paul would let his wife know it was time for tea with their guests. Tea for guests was on its way. Paul knew how to impress his guests. And where would the Rotarians go after tea? How about downstairs to the Rotary boardroom? Around the table are some of the people who made Rotary what it is today. Meeting in a basement presents its own issues, one of which was what we discovered, a shifting foundation. The home was literally slipping down the hill. Note the floor. There's a lot of concrete in this basement to anchor the home to its moorings. If the old guard were to come downstairs today, they would be right at home. We colored up the picture to give you a feeling of what an early Rotary meeting looked like. Let's head upstairs for a quick view of the second floor. Here is the main stairway at the start of the project. Paul loved the windows all over the front of the home. Like most of the home, we designed the renovated windows and walls to last another 90 years. Let's have a quick look around. There were 3 bedrooms on the second floor, but only 1 bath for the entire home. Welcome to your guest bedroom. Next is Jean's room. A place to take a nap or write a note. and down the hall was their bedroom. It was here that Jean would do her sewing for charities, and sadly, it was where Paul passed away. He wanted to be able to look out and see his friendship garden, but for Paul, it was also his peace garden. He could see among the trees that had been planted by his visitors from all around the world the one thing that shined most brightly in his memory, the Japanese lantern that he received in 1935. Just one more thing. Like all homeowners do after they have lived in their home a while, they expand it. And that's what we did while we were restoring the home. We wanted a room for Rotarians to meet during their visits to the home without compromising its integrity. In 2019, we tried out that room. If you were to join today, you would find a warm, welcoming space that filled the backyard view that Paul and Jean had with a view of Rotarians doing what they do best: meeting and sharing fellowship. This is what Paul and Jean would see today if they stepped out onto their backyard balcony. As Paul would say, this is a changing world. We must be prepared to change with it. The story of Rotary will have to be written again and again. If you want to learn more, please visit the Foundation website at paulharrishome.org. If you have any questions or would like a tour of the home, please contact myself, Marshall Schmidt, or Cheryl McIntyre. Thank you for your time.
Well, thank you, Cheryl, and Marshall too, I know is with us on this call for a wonderful presentation about the current state of the home. And this is an open invitation to all of you from the Rotary Club of Air and whoever else is visiting this meeting online to come to Chicago and see where Paul and Jean Harris lived and where Rotary was really begun. And I'm sure Cheryl will encourage this, but we are still in our fundraising mode, and we would be grateful for any donations, whether it's modest in amount or you want to purchase a brick with your name or your name of your club or honoring someone else. Please go to our website at paulharrishome.org. You can make a contribution online. And for naming opportunities, which are still available in other parts of the home, we would certainly encourage that for major gifts. If there's anything further that President Timo wants to share, or either John or President Bob, I think now is the time. I know we're a few minutes behind schedule, but I do have my drink at the ready and am prepared for a toast. In Gaelic, we might say Slán Java, but or Slán Java, my pronunciation, but others might have simply cheers. But I would like to propose a toast to all of us and to Rotary, the greatest humanitarian service organization the world has seen. Cheers. Slán Java.
Thank you, everybody, for these fantastic presentations. I know a lot of work went into this. It clearly paid off. Everybody's very impressed. Thanks to all of the presenters. I think we can leave the line open, but maybe we officially conclude the meeting with a nice bell, Cheryl and Tamara, if you're ready. But we can just keep going for those who want to continue with the conversation.